They say blood is thicker than water, but they never warned me blood could drain $150,000 from my accounts. 3 weeks ago, my parents stood in court defending the thief, my sister. They called me vindictive for seeking justice, but one single question from Judge Vance silenced them and tore apart 30 years of hypocrisy. Before I reveal that question, let me tell you about the day my life shattered. My name is Gwendolyn Fairhaven. I am 32 years old, and if you were to ask anyone at Nebula Logistics to describe me in a single word, they would likely choose efficient as the director of strategy for one of Seattle's premier high-tech transport firms. My life is built on the architecture of precision. I deal in supply chains, in the optimization of routes, and in the mitigation of risk. I do not like surprises. I do not like variables that cannot be accounted for in a spreadsheet. My existence is a meticulously curated grid of appointments, deadlines, and milestones, all leading toward the life I had visualized for myself since I was a teenager studying under a scholarship lamp while my friends were out partying. For the last 8 years, I have lived well below my means, while my peers in the tech sector were leasing luxury vehicles and upgrading to the newest penthouse apartment straight out of university. I drove a reliable, 5-year-old sedan and lived in a modest studio apartment that smelled faintly of old carpet and rain. I brought my lunch to work. I invested 60% of my post-tax income. I did this because I had a singular goal, a vision of sanctuary that kept me going through 80-hour work weeks and the relentless gray drizzle of the Pacific Northwest. That goal was the penthouse at the Meridian. It was not just an apartment, it was a statement. It was a waterfront property with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Puget Sound, a place where I could stand with a glass of wine and watch the ferries cut through the dark water. Knowing that I owned the view, I had finally signed the initial paperwork 2 weeks ago. The down payment was ready in my escrow account. The closing was scheduled for this coming Friday. It was the culmination of a decade of discipline. I felt lighter, as if the heavy coat of responsibility I had worn since childhood was finally being unbuttoned. I suppose that false sense of security was the first mistake. My family, on the surface, appeared to be the perfect supporting cast for my success. My father, Robert, and my mother, Linda, were the picture of suburban contentment. They lived in the same house where I grew up, a comfortable 2-story home in a respectable neighborhood. They spoke often of how proud they were of me. "Gwen is the rock," my father would say at Thanksgiving dinners, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You never have to worry about Gwen." And then there was Tiffany. My sister is 28 years old, 4 years my junior, and she exists in a reality that is fundamentally different from mine. Tiffany describes herself as a digital creator, an influencer, or a brand ambassador depending on the day of the week. To the naked eye, however, she is unemployed. Yet, her life is a glossy magazine spread of brunches, spa days, and unboxing videos. She is beautiful, certainly, with the kind of polished, high-maintenance aesthetic that requires immense time and capital to sustain. For years, I watched from the sidelines as Tiffany arrived at family gatherings, carrying handbags that cost more than my first car. I saw her checking into resorts in Cabo and Aspen on Instagram. When I asked my parents how she afforded it, they would smile with a benevolent, almost pitying indulgence. "She is getting very lucky with her modeling work," my mother would say, waving her hand as if the details were too pedestrian to discuss. "The internet is a goldmine these days. Gwen, you should be happy for her." "She is building a brand," my father would add, defensiveness creeping into his tone. "It takes money to make money." I never pressed. I assumed, perhaps naively, that Tiffany had indeed found some algorithmic loophole in the social media economy that I did not understand. I focused on my own lane. I focused on my savings. I focused on the Meridian. The cracks in my world appeared on a Monday morning. It was raining, a standard Seattle downpour that sheeted against the glass walls of my office at Nebula. I was reviewing the quarterly projections when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was Mr. Henderson, my mortgage lender. I picked up, expecting a routine confirmation of the closing time for Friday. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice professional and bright. I have the wire transfer details ready for the closing costs. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, pregnant silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ms. Fairhaven, Henderson said, and his voice lacked its usual jovial cadence. We have a problem. A significant problem. I frowned, signaling my assistant to close the door. What kind of problem? The appraisal came in fine. My employment verification is solid. It is not the appraisal, Henderson said, clearing his throat awkwardly. It is your debt-to-income ratio. It spiked over the weekend when we did the final credit pull. The underwriters have flagged it. As it stands, the loan for the penthouse has been denied. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound of disbelief. That is impossible. My credit score is 820. I have zero debt. I paid off my student loans 5 years ago. I pay my credit card balance in full every month. Run it again. It must be a system error. We ran it 3 times. Gwendolyn, I am looking at the report right now. There is a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, recorded against your assets. It has a balance of $150,000. It was opened 6 months ago, and it is nearly maxed out. The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. I do not have a HELOC, I said, articulating every word slowly. I do not own a home yet. That is why I am buying this one. How can I have a home equity line without a home? It is secured against a property in, let me see here, it is a co-signed instrument, Henderson explained, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. But the primary liability is under your Social Security number. The monthly payments on $150,000, combined with the new mortgage, put you well outside the approval bracket. Unless this is cleared up within 24 hours, the deal falls through. You will lose the apartment, and likely your earnest money. I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the rain blurring the city lights, feeling a coldness spread from my stomach to my fingertips. $150,000. I am a strategist. When a crisis occurs at Nebula, I do not panic. I investigate. I turned to my computer monitors. I logged into the Equifax portal, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a tremor I could barely control. I bypassed the summary screen and went straight to the detailed trade lines. There it was. A HELOC opened 6 months ago with a regional bank I had never used. The total limit was $150,000. The current balance was $149,800. I clicked on the details. I needed to see where the correspondence was going. If this was identity theft, it was usually some P.O. box in another state or a hacked email address. The billing address listed was not a stranger's house. It was 42 Elm Street, my parents' house. I stared at the screen, blinking rapidly. My brain tried to process the information, searching for a benign explanation. Perhaps my father had added me to something for tax purposes and forgotten to tell me. But $150,000. And why would he need my credit? His credit was impeccable. I called the regional bank immediately. I navigated through the automated system, my voice shaking with suppressed rage until I got a human representative. I verified my identity, my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, because I was the primary account holder. The representative gave me access to the transaction history without hesitation. I need to see where this money went, I told the representative. I need to know if it was a lump sum withdrawal. One moment. Ms. Fairhaven, the woman said. No, it looks like a series of drawdowns over the last 6 months. Debit card transactions and wire transfers. Read them to me, I commanded, pulling up a blank spreadsheet on my second monitor. Okay, the first large transaction was 5 months ago, a wire transfer for $12,000 to Porsche of Bellevue, down payment. I stopped typing. A Porsche. Tiffany had driven up to the house 4 months ago in a white Porsche Macan. She told us she was leasing it as part of a partnership with a luxury car rental app. My father had gone out and kicked the tires, beaming with pride. Continue, I whispered. There are multiple airline charges, Delta Airlines. First class. 3 tickets to Cabo San Lucas in November. I remembered November. Tiffany had gone to Cabo for a content creation retreat. She had posted photos of herself drinking mimosas in a lay-flat seat. Nordstrom, $3,000. Gucci, $4,500. The Four Seasons Hotel, $2,000. The list went on. It was a litany of excess. It was a detailed ledger of a life I had denied myself so that I could afford my future, being lived by someone else using my name. "Is there anything recent?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am. Last month, a single charge of $8,000 to Lux Events and Catering." I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Last month was Tiffany's 28th birthday. I remembered the day vividly. I had called her to ask if she wanted to go out for dinner. She had sighed into the phone, sounding exhausted. "Oh, Gwen, honestly, I am just doing something super small this year. Just a few influencer friends. Really boring industry stuff. You would hate it. It is just networking. We will do a family dinner later." I had felt a pang of rejection, but I swallowed it. I sent her a $300 gift card and stayed home, eating takeout and working on a presentation. 2 days later, I saw the photos. It was not a small gathering. It was a gala. There was a champagne tower. There was a DJ. There was a custom flower wall with her name in neon lights. She wore a dress that looked like spun gold. And now, looking at the transaction history, I realized the punchline of the joke. I had not been invited to the party because I was not a guest. I was the sponsor. I sat back in my chair, the office around me fading into a dull hum. The betrayal was not sharp like a knife. It was heavy like lead. It settled in my chest, making it hard to breathe. This was not just theft. This was not just a stranger hacking a database. The address was my parents' house. The car was in my parents' driveway. The party was attended by my parents. I had seen them in the background of the photos, holding glasses of champagne that I had paid for. They knew. They had to know. You do not accidentally open a line of credit in your daughter's name. You do not accidentally intercept the mail at your own house. You do not accidentally let your youngest daughter spend $150,000 that she does not have. I looked at the time. It was 10:30 in the morning. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray city. My reflection in the glass looked the same as it had an hour ago. Sharp blazer, pulled back hair, stoic expression. But inside, the structural integrity of my world had collapsed. My phone rang again. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetie," her voice chirped, oblivious and bright. "I was just calling to see if you wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday. Dad is making his roast." I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. The audacity was breathtaking. They were living in a reality where they could rob me blind and still expect me to show up for Sunday roast. "Gwen, are you there?" I brought the phone back to my ear. "I am here," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, robotic, devoid of the warmth I usually feigned for them. "So, Sunday," she pressed. "I will see you before Sunday." I said. I ended the call. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. I did exactly what I was trained to do. I organized the data. I printed the bank statements. I highlighted the fraudulent signatures on the digital copies the bank had emailed me. I compiled the evidence into a neat, waterproof folder. I picked up my purse. I walked out of my office, past my assistant. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," I said. "I have a family emergency." "Is everything okay, Gwendolyn?" she asked, looking concerned. "No," I said, not breaking stride. "But it will be corrected." I took the elevator down to the garage. My 5-year-old sedan was waiting for me. I got in, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and set the GPS for Tiffany's luxury apartment building, the one she claimed was paid for by brand deals. I realized now that the rent was likely coming from another credit card I had not yet discovered. I started the engine. The rain lashed against the windshield, distorting the world outside. But my vision had never been clearer. They thought I was the passive one, the responsible one, the one who would take the hit to keep the peace. They were about to learn that optimization works both ways. You can optimize for growth, and you can optimize for destruction. I pulled out of the garage and merged into traffic, heading toward the confrontation that would end my life as I knew it. The drive to the View Towers took 20 minutes. I spent every second of that drive gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned the color of old bone. The rain had intensified, hammering against the roof of my sedan like a warning, but inside the car, the silence was absolute. I did not play the radio. I did not call my lawyer yet. I needed to look her in the eye. I needed to see if the person who had decimated my financial future was truly the sister I had spent my childhood protecting from neighborhood bullies, or if she was a stranger wearing a familiar face. I pulled up to the valet stand. The View was one of those aggressively modern buildings in downtown Seattle that sold itself on lifestyle rather than square footage. It had a concierge, a rooftop infinity pool, and a monthly homeowner association fee that could feed a family of 4. I knew Tiffany lived here. I had assumed, based on her lies, that her agency paid for it. As I handed my keys to the valet, a young man who looked at my 5-year-old car with barely concealed disdain, my phone chimed with a fraud alert from a credit monitoring service I had activated 10 minutes ago in the parking garage at work. New inquiry American Express Platinum. Supplementary card holder Tiffany Fairhaven. I stopped walking in the middle of the lobby. The marble floor was cold beneath my boots. I pulled up the details. It was a card linked to an old account I rarely used, one with a high limit intended for emergencies. The billing history loaded on my screen. The rent for apartment 12B was $4,200 a month. It had been charged to this card for the last 5 months. I felt a strange, cold sensation wash over me, like icy water trickling down my spine. She had not just taken the home equity line. She was systematically bleeding me dry from every available artery. I put the phone in my pocket. The anger that had been a hot, chaotic fire in my chest suddenly coalesced into something else. It became ice. It became the cold, hard logic that made me excellent at my job. I was no longer a sister visiting a sister. I was an auditor visiting an embezzler. I took the elevator to the 12th floor. I did not knock. I rang the doorbell, a long, sustained press that I knew would be irritating. It took 2 minutes for the door to open. Tiffany stood there. She was wearing a kimono-style robe made of raw silk, dyed a pale, shimmering lavender. I recognized the brand immediately. It was from a boutique in Paris. It cost $600. I knew this because I had seen the charge on the statement an hour ago. "Gwen?" She blinked, looking more annoyed than surprised. She held a matcha latte in one hand and her iPhone in the other. Her hair was perfectly styled in loose, beachy waves, and her makeup was flawless. Despite it being 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, "What are you doing here? I am literally in the middle of filming a Get Ready With Me segment. You threw off my lighting." She did not step back to let me in. She stood in the doorway, blocking my path, treating me like a door-to-door solicitor she wanted to dismiss. "Move," I said. My voice was low. It was not the voice I used to read her bedtime stories. It was the voice I used when I fired a vendor for breach of contract. Tiffany frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together. "Excuse me, you can't just barge in here. I have a brand image to maintain, and this energy is very toxic." I pushed past her. I did not shove her, but I walked forward with enough authority that she instinctively retreated. I stepped into the apartment. It smelled of expensive vanilla candles. Another $50 of my money burning away into the atmosphere. The living room was a studio set. There were 3 ring lights set up around a velvet sofa. Clothes were strewn everywhere, draped over chairs, piled on the floor. It looked like a luxury department store had exploded. I walked to the kitchen island, which was covered in unopened packages from high-end designers. I cleared a space by sweeping a stack of fashion magazines onto the floor. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Hey," Tiffany yelped, rushing over. "What is wrong with you? Those are for inspiration." I opened my briefcase. I took out the thick stack of papers, the bank statements, the loan documents, the credit report, and slammed them onto the quartz countertop. The sound echoed through the apartment, cutting through the ambient noise of the rain outside. $150,000, I said. Tiffany stopped. She looked at the papers, then back at me. For a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but it was not fear. It was the look of a child who had been caught with a hand in the cookie jar and was already calculating the lie to get out of it. She took a sip of her matcha latte. She shrugged. "Okay," she said, drawing the word out. "So you saw the notifications. I was going to tell you, Gwen, honestly, You were going to tell me," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "You were going to tell me that you forged my signature on a bank loan, that you mortgaged my future to buy a Porsche and trips to Cabo." "It is not a Porsche. It is an investment," she corrected me, her tone condescending, as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "And I did not forge anything. I signed on your behalf. There is a difference. We are sisters. What is yours is mine. Right? Isn't that what Mom always says?" I stared at her. The air in the room felt thin. "This is a felony, Tiffany. This is bank fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. I lost my house today. The loan for the penthouse was denied because you maxed out my credit." Tiffany rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes. She set her latte down and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over the silk robe I had paid for. "Oh, please, that penthouse was pretentious anyway. You don't need all that space. You work all the time. You practically live at the office." She waved a hand dismissively. "Look, Gwen, you are looking at this all wrong. You are thinking like an employee. I am thinking like a CEO. I needed capital to launch the Tiffany F. Fit brand. You have money sitting in accounts doing nothing. You are a hoarder. I am just putting that capital to work. Once my TikTok hits 1 million followers, which is projected to happen by Q3, by the way, I will get sponsorships that pay $20,000 a post. I will pay you back double. Consider it a seed round investment." My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists at my sides to stop the tremors. It was the sheer entitlement that disarmed me. She did not see herself as a thief. She saw herself as a visionary who was momentarily embarrassed by a lack of liquidity. "I did not agree to be an investor," I said through gritted teeth. "And I certainly did not agree to let you impersonate me. How did you get the loan approved?" "The bank requires ID verification. They require a wet signature or a verified digital footprint," Tiffany sighed, picking at a manicured fingernail. "You make everything so complicated. It was easy. I just needed your passport and your social security card." "My passport is in my safe," I said. "In my apartment. You do not have the combination." Tiffany went silent. She looked away, toward the window. A small, smug smile played on her lips. The smile of someone holding a trump card. "I didn't need the combination," she said softly. "Then how did you get it?" She turned back to me, her eyes bright with a challenge. "Mom and Dad gave it to me." The room spun. I actually had to reach out and grip the edge of the counter to keep my balance. The granite felt cold and hard under my palm. "What?" I whispered. "Mom and Dad," she repeated, louder this time, gaining confidence from my shock. "I told them I needed a bridge loan to secure a partnership with a major fashion house. I told them you would be okay with it, but you were too busy with your boring logistics stuff to handle the paperwork. Dad drove over to your place while you were on that business trip to Chicago in August. He has the spare key. Remember, he opened the safe. Mom scanned the passport and emailed it to me. They even helped me practice your signature so it would match the one on your driver's license." I felt bile rise in my throat. I tasted acid. It was a physical blow, harder than any slap. My parents, the people who had taught me to always return the extra change to the cashier, the people who sat in the front row of my graduation. They had broken into my home. They had violated my privacy. They had conspired with my sister to rob me. They knew, I asked, my voice cracking. They knew you were taking $150,000. Well, they didn't know the exact amount, Tiffany admitted, shrugging again. I told them it was a standard business line of credit. They trust me. Gwen, they believe in my potential. Unlike you, you have always been so jealous, haven't you? You have the money, but I have the charisma. I have the life. She walked over to the rack of clothes and began sifting through them, dismissing me. Honestly, you should be thanking them. They are trying to help me succeed so I don't have to rely on anyone. Isn't that what you want? For me to be independent. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the hollowness behind the beauty. I saw the rot beneath the silk. And for the first time, I saw my parents clearly, not as the benevolent guardians of my childhood, but as the architects of this monster standing before me. They had created her. They had fed her delusion until it became a hunger that consumed everything around it, including me. I took a deep breath. The nausea began to subside, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. You have 48 hours, I said. Tiffany paused, holding a hanger with a sequined dress. What? You have 48 hours, I repeated. To return the Porsche, to sell every single bag, shoe, and dress in this apartment, to liquidate whatever assets you think you have. You need to return the $150,000 to the bank. If the balance is not zero by Thursday morning, I am going to the police. Tiffany laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. She turned around, the dress still in her hand. You are bluffing, she said. You won't call the police. You are Gwendolyn Fairhaven. You care too much about what people think. Can you imagine the scandal? Nebula director arrests sister. You would be humiliated. Mom and Dad would never forgive you. I am not bluffing, Tiffany. Yes, you are, she sneered, stepping closer, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and arrogance. You are weak, Gwen. You always fold. You always fix it. That is your job. You are the fixer. So go fix this. Pay off the loan. And I will pay you back when I am famous. But don't come in here threatening me. It is pathetic. She turned her back on me. Now get out. I have to film. I stared at her back for a long moment. She was so sure of herself. She was so certain that the social contract of family would protect her from the consequences of her actions. She banked on my shame being stronger than my anger. She was wrong. I did not say another word. I turned and walked out of the apartment. I did not slam the door. I closed it gently, with a soft click that sounded like the final period at the end of a very long sentence. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. I pressed the button. As I waited, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved earlier. Harrison and Associates, a receptionist answered. This is Gwendolyn Fairhaven, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion. I would like to retain Mr. Harrison. I have a case involving complex financial fraud and identity theft, and I need to file a police report. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, shutting out the view of Tiffany's luxury prison, I knew one thing for certain. The sister I loved was dead. The woman in that apartment was a parasite. And I was done being the host. The house at 42 Elm Street had always been a sanctuary of beige carpets and predictable routines. It was the place where I had learned to tie my shoes, where I had studied for my SATs, and where I had brought home straight-A report cards that were taped to the refrigerator with magnet clips. But as I pulled into the driveway that Tuesday evening, the house loomed like a fortress of secrets. The rain had not let up. It drummed a relentless rhythm on the roof of my car. Sounding like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping for attention, I had been summoned. That was the only word for it. After I left Tiffany's apartment. My phone had remained silent for 3 hours. Then, a single text message from my father appeared. Come home. Now. We need to settle this. I turned off the ignition. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned with a mixture of dread and a foolish, lingering hope, part of me. the part that was still a child seeking approval. Hoped that they were calling me over to apologize. I hoped they would be sitting at the kitchen table, heads bowed in shame, ready to explain how they had been manipulated by Tiffany, ready to beg for my forgiveness for helping her steal my identity. I was wrong. I unlocked the front door with my key. The key, I now realized, gave me access to a crime scene, and stepped inside. The air in the house was stiflingly warm. It smelled of lemon polish and pot roast, the scent of a wholesome American family dinner. It was a grotesque contrast to the reality of what was happening. My parents were waiting for me in the living room. They were not sitting at the kitchen table. My father, Robert, sat in his leather recliner, the one he claimed was his throne. My mother, Linda, was perched on the edge of the floral sofa, clutching a tissue to her nose. Tiffany was not there. Of course she was not there. They had tucked her away safely, shielding her from the fallout, leaving me to face the tribunal alone. I walked into the room and remained standing. I did not take off my coat. I felt like a stranger in the museum of my own childhood. "Sit down, Gwendolyn," my father said. His voice was not angry. It was heavy with disappointment, the tone he used to use when I got a B+ instead of an A-. "I will stand," I replied. He sighed, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You really frightened your sister today. She called us in hysterics. She could barely breathe. Do you have any idea what you have done to her mental state?" I stared at him. I waited for the punchline. "I frightened her dad. She stole $150,000 from me. She committed a federal crime, and you helped her." "Watch your tone," he snapped, his eyes flashing. "We are not talking about federal crimes. We are talking about family. We are talking about the fact that you stormed into her home and threatened her like some sort of loan shark. The neighbors might have heard. People talk. Gwendolyn, if word gets out that you are harassing your sister, what will people think of this family?" I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, bitter and jagged. "People will think that we raised a thief, because that is what she is." "She is not a thief," my mother wailed. It was a sudden, piercing sound that made me flinch. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "She is a dreamer. Gwen, she is trying so hard to make something of herself. You know how competitive her industry is. She needed that car. She needed those clothes. It is all about image. If she shows up to a meeting in a Honda, nobody takes her seriously. She was doing it for her career." "So my career does not matter?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to keep it steel hard. "My credit score does not matter. I lost the penthouse today. Mom, the loan was denied. I lost the home I have been saving for since I was 24. Does that mean anything to you?" My mother waved her hand dismissively, as if I were complaining about a broken fingernail. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You can always buy another house. You are young. You are single. You make a fortune at that logistics company. Why do you even need a penthouse? It is just vanity. Gwendolyn, but Tiffany, this is her shot. She is fragile. She needs our support." "She needs to go to jail," I said coldly. The room went deadly silent. My father slowly stood up. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate, casting a long shadow across the rug. "You will not say that," he commanded. "You will not speak of your sister that way. We are going to fix this, right here, right now. We have come up with a solution." "A solution?" I asked. "Yes," my father said, adjusting his belt. "We have looked at the numbers. We understand that you are upset about the money. So, here is what we are going to do. You will acknowledge the debt as your own. You will tell the bank it was a misunderstanding, that you authorized Tiffany to use the funds. In exchange, your mother and I will pay you back." I blinked. "You have $150,000 lying around." "No," he said, clearing his throat. "We are on a fixed income. You know that. But we can manage $500 a month. We will write you a check every first of the month until the debt is cleared." I did the math instantly. It was a reflex. 150,000 divided by 500. That is 300 months, I said. Dad, that is 25 years. You will be 100 years old by the time that debt is paid, and that does not even include the interest. The interest alone on that HELOC is more than $500 a month. You are asking me to pay for my own robbery. We are asking you to be a sister, my mother cried out, standing up to join him. We are asking you to have a heart. Look at you. You stand there in your expensive suit, with your expensive watch, judging us. You have never known what it is like to struggle. Tiffany is drowning, and you are refusing to throw her a life raft because you are worried about what a credit score, a number on a computer screen. It is not just a number, I said, my voice rising. It is my integrity. It is my name. You used my name. You stole my passport. You forged my signature. Do you realize how sick that is? You violated me. We did what was necessary, my father shouted, slamming his hand down on the coffee table. The ceramic coasters rattled. We knew you would say no. You are always so stingy, so rigid. You hoard your money like a dragon. We thought once Tiffany made it big, she would pay it back, and you would never even know. It was a victimless crime until you started digging. A victimless crime, I repeated. The words tasted like ash. I am the victim, Dad. You are only a victim because you choose to be, he roared. You are being vindictive. You are jealous that Tiffany is following her passion while you are stuck in some boring corporate office. That is what this is really about, isn't it? You want to punish her for being happy? I looked at them. I looked at the parents who had raised me. I saw the lines on their faces, the gray in their hair, and I realized with a terrifying clarity that they did not love me. They loved the idea of me. They loved the stability I provided, the bragging rights I gave them at neighborhood barbecues, but they did not love me enough to protect me. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a resource. I was an ATM machine that had malfunctioned. I was the backup generator kept in the basement, ignored until the lights went out, and then kicked when I failed to start. Tiffany was the protagonist of this family. I was merely the supporting character who was expected to sacrifice herself for the plot development of the star. I am not jealous, I said quietly. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, vast emptiness. I am exhausted, and I am done. I turned toward the door. Where are you going? My father demanded. We are not finished. You have not agreed to the payment plan. There is no payment plan, I said, looking back at them over my shoulder. I gave Tiffany 48 hours. She has about 30 hours left. If the money is not returned, I am filing the police report, and I will name both of you as accomplices for providing the documentation to commit fraud. My mother let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She collapsed back onto the sofa. You would send your own parents to prison. You are a monster, Gwendolyn, a cold-hearted monster. You are destroying this family, my father yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. If you walk out that door and go to the police, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? I will write you out of the will. You will have no family left. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I looked around the house one last time. I looked at the family photos on the mantelpiece, photos of Tiffany smiling, Tiffany dancing, Tiffany graduating. There were hardly any of me. I think, I said, my voice steady and devoid of tears, that I have not had a family for a very long time. I just did not realize it until today. Gwendolyn, my mother screamed. Don't you dare. Don't you dare ruin her life. I am not ruining her life. Mom, I said. She did that, and by teaching her that consequences are for other people, you helped her do it. I opened the door. The cold, wet air of the Seattle night hit my face, shocking and clean. Behind me, the sounds of my mother's wailing and my father's cursing filled the hallway. A cacophony of toxic guilt and displaced rage. I stepped out and closed the door. I closed it firmly. I walked down the driveway to my car. The rain mingling with the tears that finally, traitorously, began to slide down my cheeks, but as I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors, I felt a strange sensation beneath the pain. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I had carried for 32 years, finally being cut loose. I started the engine. I had 30 hours to wait, and then I would show them exactly what Gwendolyn Fairhaven was capable of when she stopped optimizing for their happiness and started executing for her own justice. The office of Harrison and Associates was located in a brutalist concrete building on 4th Avenue, a stark contrast to the glass and steel optimism of the tech sector where I spent my days. The interior smelled of old paper, mahogany, and expensive retainer fees. It was a place where problems went to be dissected, and that was exactly what I needed. I did not need a therapist. I did not need a shoulder to cry on. I needed a shark in a 3-piece suit who understood the intricate anatomy of financial fraud. Mr. Harrison was a man in his late 50s with eyes like polished flint and a demeanor that suggested he had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. He sat across from me at a conference table that was large enough to land a small aircraft on. Between us lay the dossier I had compiled, the bank statements, the HELOC documents, and the printouts of Tiffany's digital footprint. "This is thorough," Harrison said, tapping a manicured finger on the spreadsheet I had created. "Most clients come to me with a shoebox of receipts and a vague sense of betrayal. You have brought me a forensic audit. I work in logistics." "Mr. Harrison," I replied, my voice flat. "I specialize in tracking lost assets. I just never expected the asset to be my own life savings." "Let us look deeper then," he said. If she was comfortable forging a deed of trust for a home equity line, it is highly unlikely she stopped there. Fraud of this magnitude is rarely an isolated incident. It is usually a pattern, a lifestyle. He was right. Over the next 4 hours, we peeled back the layers of my financial identity like an onion, and with every layer, the stench of rot grew stronger. Harrison had access to deep-dive credit monitoring tools that went beyond the consumer apps I had on my phone. He pulled reports from all 3 major bureaus: Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. The silence in the room was only broken by the clicking of his mouse and the hum of the air conditioning. Then, Harrison stopped. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "Ms. Fairhaven," he said softly, "do you have a Chase Sapphire Reserve card?" "No," I said. "I have never banked with Chase." "You do now," he said. "Opened 3 months ago. Limit $30,000. Maxed out." He turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped, a sensation akin to missing a step on a staircase in the dark. But we were not done. "And a Capital One Venture card," he continued, reading from the list. $20,000 limit. Current balance is $19,400. And this is interesting. Do you have a medical financing account? Something called CareLend. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "It is a line of credit typically used for elective cosmetic surgery," Harrison explained. "It was opened 5 months ago. $10,000, paid directly to the Seattle Aesthetic Institute." I closed my eyes. The nose job. Tiffany had come to Easter brunch 5 months ago with a bandage on her nose, claiming she had a deviated septum corrected and that her insurance covered it. We had all brought her soup and flowers. My mother had made a big show of fluffing her pillows on the couch. It was not a deviated septum, it was a rhinoplasty, and I had paid for it. Harrison did the final tally. He wrote the number on a legal pad and slid it across the table to me. $185,000. It was not just a number. It was my freedom. It was my retirement contribution for the last 5 years. It was the penthouse. It was the hours I had spent working late nights while Tiffany was partying. "This changes things," Harrison said, his voice hardening. "This is not just a family dispute anymore. This is aggravated identity theft. Given the amount and the duration, we are looking at multiple felony counts. But to make this stick, to ensure the district attorney takes this seriously and does not just tell you to sue her in civil court, we need to prove intent. We need to prove she didn't just borrow the cards. We need to prove she impersonated you to get them. For the next 2 days, I did not sleep. I became a ghost in my own life. I took a leave of absence from Nebula Logistics, telling my boss I was dealing with a severe legal matter. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by monitors, and went to work. I needed to link the digital theft to the physical reality. I pulled up the transaction history for the fraudulent Chase card. I saw a charge for a 5-star sushi restaurant in downtown Seattle on October 12th at 7:30 in the evening. I opened Instagram. I scrolled through Tiffany's feed to October 12th. There it was. A photo of a sashimi platter with gold flakes. The caption read, "Living my best life. Boss babe energy. Hustle self-made." I took a screenshot. I printed it. I stapled it to the bank statement showing the charge. I found a charge for a flight to Miami on December 2nd. I found the corresponding TikTok video of her dancing in the airport lounge, holding a boarding pass. I zoomed in on the video. The name on the boarding pass was blurred, but the flight number was visible. It matched the invoice. Then came the hardest part. I needed physical proof of the impersonation. The bank where the HELOC was signed, a local branch in Bellevue, had a security camera. Harrison filed an emergency subpoena for the footage, citing the fraud claim, because the amount was over $100,000. The bank's fraud department was cooperative. They sent over a digital file. I sat in Harrison's office to watch it. The video was grainy, black and white, time-stamped 6 months ago. I watched as a woman walked into the loan officer's cubicle. She was wearing a wig, a long, dark wig that mimicked my hairstyle. She was wearing glasses. Though Tiffany had perfect vision, she was wearing a trench coat that looked suspiciously like one I had left at my parents' house a year ago. She sat down. She handed over a passport. She signed document after document. She was playing a character. She was playing me. "That is premeditation," Harrison said, pointing at the screen. "That is not an impulse crime. That is a performance. She dressed up as you to rob you, while I was building the case that would destroy my sister's life. My extended family was trying to destroy my peace. My parents had clearly been busy. They had spun a narrative to the aunts, uncles, and cousins. The narrative was simple. Gwendolyn is having a mental breakdown. Gwendolyn is jealous. Gwendolyn is attacking poor, defenseless Tiffany over a misunderstanding about money. My phone began to vibrate with the relentlessness of an angry hive. A text from Aunt Sarah. "I heard what you did to your mother. She is devastated. How can you be so cruel over money? You can always make more money, but you only have one family." A voicemail from Uncle Mike Gwen. "Give me a call. Your dad says you are threatening to call the cops on Tiff. You need to calm down. Sweetheart, you don't air dirty laundry in public. It is ungrateful behavior after everything they did for you. Ungrateful." The word echoed in my head. Ungrateful for what? For the roof they provided while they plotted to undermine my future. I did not reply to any of them. I did not try to defend myself. I knew that in their eyes, the person with the money was always the villain if they refused to share it. I was the cold corporate executive. Tiffany was the bubbly, struggling artist. The script was written long before I was born. I initiated the nuclear option. I went into my contacts and selected block caller for every single person who shared my DNA. My mother, my father, Tiffany, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins who only called when they needed a loan. One by one, they vanished into the digital void. But digital walls were not enough. I felt unsafe. I knew my father had a key to my current apartment, the same key he had used to steal my passport. I called a locksmith. "I need every lock changed," I told the man when he arrived, "and I need deadbolts installed on the bedroom door." He looked at me with curiosity but asked no questions. While he drilled, I set up a wireless security system. I mounted a camera facing the front door, one in the hallway and one in the living room. I linked them to a cloud server. I was turning my home into a fortress because the enemy was not a burglar in a mask. It was the people who had keys. The silence in my apartment that night was absolute. No phone calls, no family group chats pinging, just the hum of the hard drives and the rain against the window. It was a lonely feeling, a profound isolation that ached in my chest. But it was also clean. It was the sterility of a surgery room. I was cutting out the infection. The next morning, Thursday, the 48-hour deadline expired. My bank account remained empty. There was no wire transfer from Tiffany. There was no apology, just a deafening silence that confirmed her arrogance. She truly believed I would not do it. I put on my sharpest blazer, a charcoal gray armor. I picked up the heavy binder containing the evidence. I met Harrison in the lobby of the building, and together we walked 3 blocks to the Seattle Police Department's West Precinct. The station smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and misery. It was a place of fluorescent lights and weary faces. We approached the front desk, and after a brief conversation, we were escorted to a detective's desk. Detective Miller was a man who looked like he had not slept in a decade. His desk was buried under mountains of paperwork. He looked at me, then at Harrison, with a weary skepticism. "So," Miller said, leaning back in his chair, "what do we have? Another family dispute? Look, folks, usually we tell people to handle this in civil court. If your sister borrowed your credit card and didn't pay it back, that is a civil matter. We don't arrest people for being bad borrowers." "This is not a bad borrower, Detective," Harrison said, his voice smooth and authoritative. He opened the binder. "This is $185,000 in fraudulent loans. This is forgery of federal documents. This is video evidence of impersonation at a federally insured bank." Harrison laid out the photos. The screenshot of the wig-wearing Tiffany, the side-by-side comparison of my signature and the forgery, the timeline of the deviated septum surgery paid for with a fraudulent medical loan. Miller's expression changed. He sat up straighter. He put on his glasses and pulled the binder closer. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers, the dates, the undeniable proof of a systematic dismantling of my identity. "She dressed up as you?" Miller asked, pointing to the photo. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched in my lap. "She used my passport. My parents facilitated the theft of the document." Miller let out a low whistle. "Okay, that changes the conversation. This isn't a civil dispute. This is first-degree identity theft. Obtaining a signature by deception, theft of property exceeding $5,000. These are Class B felonies." He looked at me, his eyes softening slightly, losing the bureaucratic glaze. "You understand what happens if we move forward, Ms. Fairhaven. Once we file this, the state takes over. You cannot drop the charges just because your mom calls crying. This goes to the prosecutor. It goes to a grand jury. Your sister will be arrested. She will be booked." "I understand," I said. "And your parents," Miller continued. "If they provided the passport knowing it would be used for fraud, they are looking at conspiracy charges or at least aiding and abetting." "I understand," I repeated. Miller pulled a form from a drawer. It was a standard police report, but it felt like a death warrant for the life I had known. He filled in the details, his pen scratching loudly against the paper. Then he turned it toward me. "I need you to sign here," he said, pointing to the complainant line, "under penalty of perjury, attesting that these events are true." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. For a fleeting second, I saw Tiffany as a toddler, holding my hand as we crossed the street. I saw my mother baking cookies. I saw my father teaching me to ride a bike. Then I saw the wig. I saw the Porsche. I saw the empty space where my future home should have been. I saw the smirk on Tiffany's face when she told me I was jealous. My hand shook. A distinct, visible tremor ran through my fingers. It was the physical manifestation of severing the deepest bond a human being has. But as the pen tip touched the paper, the shaking stopped. I signed my name, Gwendolyn Fairhaven. I put the pen down. "It is done," Miller said, pulling the paper back. "We will issue the warrant within the hour." I stood up. I walked out of the precinct into the gray Seattle afternoon. The rain was still falling, misting against my face. I looked at my hands. They were empty. I had no family. I had no house. I had a mountain of debt that was not mine. But for the first time in 6 months, I could breathe. The heavy, suffocating blanket of their expectations and their lies was gone. It was a painful, searing sort of relief, like cauterizing a wound, but it was relief nonetheless. I had burned the bridge, and I was standing on the other side, alone, but free. For the next 14 days, the world did not explode. In fact, it was irritatingly quiet. My decision to press charges had been dropped into the machinery of the legal system, and like any large bureaucracy, it took time to grind its gears. In that vacuum of silence, Tiffany grew bold. I watched her from a burner account I had created on a secure laptop. She interpreted my silence not as the calm before the storm, but as a retreat. In her mind, I had folded. I was the big sister who always cleaned up the mess, the one who threatened to tell Mom and Dad but never actually did. She assumed my visit to her apartment was just a tantrum, a venting of steam before I inevitably paid the bill and went back to my sad, corporate life. She ramped up her content. She posted photos of herself shopping for sunglasses. She posted stories about ignoring negative energy and cutting toxic people out of your life. It was a masterclass in projection. She was living on borrowed time, quite literally, yet she strutted through Seattle as if she owned the pavement. The climax of her delusion arrived on a Saturday afternoon. Tiffany announced a meet and greet for her followers. She called it Coffee and Confidence with Tiff. The venue was a trendy, glass-walled espresso bar in the Capitol Hill district, a place where the baristas wore leather aprons and the lattes cost $8. The centerpiece of the event was, of course, the white Porsche Macan. She parked it directly in front of the cafe, in a loading zone, likely assuming the ticket would be just another expense for someone else to pay. She had polished it until it gleamed like a pearl. She set up her tripod. She went live on TikTok. I was not there physically. I was sitting in my living room with Harrison, reviewing the final affidavit, but I watched it happen in real time on my screen. There were maybe 20 people there, mostly young girls who bought into the illusion she sold. Tiffany was holding court, leaning against the hood of the car, wearing a white jumpsuit that I knew cost $600 because I had seen the charge on my statement. "You guys have to manifest your dreams," she was saying to the camera, flashing a dazzling smile. "Like 6 months ago, I was just dreaming of this car, and I told myself, Tiff, you deserve this, and the universe provided. You just have to be open to receiving." The universe, as it turned out, was about to provide a very specific kind of energy. I saw them before she did, in the background of the video. 2 marked police cruisers turned the corner. They did not use sirens, but their lights were flashing, cutting through the gray afternoon gloom with rhythmic bursts of blue and red. Tiffany kept talking. "It is all about mindset. If you act rich, you become rich." The cruisers pulled up directly behind the Porsche. Blocking it in, the small crowd of fans looked confused. Some pulled out their phones. Tiffany frowned, looking over her shoulder. "Ugh, probably just a parking enforcement thing," she said to the camera, rolling her eyes. "Hold on. Guys, let me handle this." She stepped away from the car, walking toward the officers with that confident, indignant strut she used on store managers when she wanted a refund. But it was not a parking enforcement officer. It was Detective Miller, and he was not alone. 2 uniformed officers flanked him. The audio on the live stream was crisp. I heard every word. "Tiffany Fairhaven?" Miller asked. "Yes." She crossed her arms. "You are blocking my event. Can you move? I have a permit to park here." "I am not here for a parking violation," Miller said. His voice was loud, projecting over the street noise. "I have a warrant for your arrest." Tiffany froze. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a special effect. "What? That is ridiculous. Arrest for what? Identity theft in the 1st degree, bank fraud, forgery, and theft of property exceeding $5,000. Miller moved fast. Before Tiffany could process the words, he spun her around. The camera captured the exact moment her arrogance shattered. Her mouth dropped open in a perfect O of shock. "Put your hands behind your back," Miller commanded. "No," Tiffany shrieked. It was a high, piercing sound that made the audio peak. "Get off me!" "Do you know who I am? This is a mistake. My sister is crazy. She is doing this to spite me." The uniformed officer grabbed her wrists. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs was audible even over the live stream. The chat on the side of the screen went wild. "OMG! Is she getting arrested? Is this a prank? Free Tiff? Wait, did he say identity theft?" "You are hurting me," Tiffany screamed. Struggling as they marched her toward the cruiser, she looked back at her phone, which was still streaming on the tripod. "Guys, record this police brutality. My sister is a liar, Gwen. I know you are watching, you are a psycho, but the police were not done." A flatbed tow truck backed into the frame. "No!" Tiffany yelled, thrashing against the officer who was guiding her into the back seat. "Not the car. Do not touch the car. That is my car." "Actually, Miss Fairhaven," Miller said, and I could almost hear the satisfaction in his voice. "That vehicle is evidence. It was purchased with stolen funds. It is being seized." They shoved her into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut, cutting off her screaming. The last image on the live stream before a confused fan knocked the tripod over was the tow truck driver hooking chains to the axle of the Porsche Macan. I closed the laptop. Harrison looked at me. He took a sip of his coffee. "Well," he said, "that was decisive." I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not joy. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of a heavy stone finally hitting the bottom of a deep well. The splash was violent, but the fall was over. "It is done," I said. But the day was not over. The fallout was just beginning. 2 hours later, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. "Mom." I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. "Dad." I let it go to voicemail. They called 12 times in 10 minutes. Then, the text started. "Pick up the phone." "What have you done? Call us now." Gwendolyn. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a $20 bottle, paid for with my own money. From my own debit card, it tasted like nectar. I sat by the window of my rented apartment, watching the rain streak the glass. And finally, I decided to listen to the voicemail. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. My mother's voice filled the room. It was not the weeping voice I had heard at the house. It was a voice ragged with hatred. "Gwendolyn," she screamed. I could hear the echo of the police station in the background. How could you humiliate us like this? They have her in a cell. My baby is in a cell with criminals. You did this. You staged this. You knew she was having an event. You are sick. You are a sick, jealous, vindictive woman. I wish I had never given birth to you. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are dead to us." The message ended with a harsh click. I took a sip of wine. The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have destroyed me. They would have sent me spiraling into a panic attack, desperate to fix it, desperate to earn back their love. But now I just heard the desperate noise of people who had lost control. They were not mourning the loss of a daughter. They were mourning the loss of their cover-up. They were angry because their facade had been ripped away in public. I deleted the voicemail. I did not block the number yet. I needed their messages for evidence if they threatened me further. But emotionally, I blocked them. I severed the cord. "Dead to you," I whispered to the empty room. "Good. Ghosts cannot lend you money." The next morning, Harrison called me with an update from the courthouse. "The arraignment was interesting," he said. "The district attorney is very interested in this case. The sheer dollar amount, $185,000, pushes this into the top bracket of sentencing guidelines. But what really got their attention was the breach of familial trust. Judges hate it when family members steal from each other. It offends their sense of order." "Is she out?" I asked. "No," Harrison said. "And here's the kicker. Because of the flight risk, remember those trips to Cabo and the fact that she has no verifiable income. The judge set bail at $50,000, not a bond, cash bail." Can my parents pay it? They tried, Harrison said, and I could hear him smiling. They tried to put up their house, but when the court looked at their financials, they found out your parents are heavily leveraged. They have a second mortgage they never told you about. They don't have $50,000 in liquid cash, and no bail bondsman will touch Tiffany because she has no job and her only asset. The car is in police impound. So she is in jail. She is in the King County Correctional Facility, Harrison confirmed. She will be there until at least Tuesday, when they can petition for a bail reduction hearing. That is 3 days. Gwendolyn, 3 days over a weekend. I imagined Tiffany in King County Jail. I knew that place by reputation. It was a concrete box in downtown Seattle. It was loud. It smelled of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies. The lights stayed on 24 hours a day. There would be no ring lights, no filters, no matcha lattes. Tiffany, who threw a fit if the thread count on her sheets was below 600, was currently wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that had been worn by 100 other inmates. She was eating a bologna sandwich on white bread. She was sleeping on a thin mattress over a steel slab. For the first time in her life, Tiffany was experiencing a world that did not care who she was. The guards did not care about her TikTok following. The other inmates did not care about her brand. In there, she was just inmate number ending in 452. I finished my work for the day. I was preparing a presentation for Nebula regarding a supply chain disruption in the Pacific. I was focused. My mind was sharp. I did not cry for my sister. I did not cry for my parents. The tears I had shed in the driveway 2 weeks ago were the last they would ever get from me. Tiffany had wanted to be famous. She had wanted everyone to look at her. Well, she had gotten her wish. Her mugshot was already circulating on local news blogs. She was famous now, and I was finally, blissfully, anonymous. Tiffany did not rot in jail. She marinated, after 3 days of confinement in the King County Correctional Facility, a period I am sure she will later describe in a memoir as her Nelson Mandela era. My parents managed to scrape together the $50,000 for bail. I do not know who they borrowed it from, perhaps a predatory lender, or perhaps they liquidated their retirement accounts entirely. It did not matter. The money was paid, and Tiffany walked out of the detention center not with her head bowed in shame, but with a new, terrifying narrative. They did not hire a reputable defense attorney. The forensic evidence Harrison and I had compiled was so overwhelming that any lawyer with a shred of integrity would have advised a guilty plea and a beg for mercy. Instead, they hired Leonard Smalls. Smalls was a billboard lawyer. His face, plastered on bus stops across South Seattle, usually promised to get you cash for your whiplash. He wore suits that were a shade too blue and cologne that arrived in the room 5 minutes before he did. He was not a legal scholar. He was a street fighter who specialized in muddying the waters until the jury was too confused to convict. His strategy was simple, brutal, and entirely expected to destroy the credibility of the victim. It began on a Tuesday morning, a week after the arrest. I was at my desk at Nebula Logistics, monitoring a shipment of semiconductors moving through the Strait of Malacca. My office line rang. It was the executive assistant to Marcus Sterling, our CEO. "Mr. Sterling needs to see you. Gwendolyn, immediately." My stomach tightened. In my 8 years at Nebula, I had only been summoned to the C-suite for commendations or crisis management regarding global supply chains. I walked to the elevator, smoothing my skirt, preparing for a professional disaster. When I entered Sterling's office, the mood was funereal. Marcus Sterling was a man of few words, a former naval officer who valued discipline above all else. He was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. "Sit down, Gwendolyn," he said. I sat. "Is there an issue with the Taiwan account, sir?" He turned around. "This is not about Taiwan. It is about an email I received this morning, and 3 phone calls to Human Resources." He slid a piece of paper across his mahogany desk. It was a printout of an email sent from my father's address. The subject line read, "Concerning the mental stability of your director, Gwendolyn Fairhaven." I picked it up. My hands did not shake. I had moved past shaking. I was now in a state of cold, analytical observation. The email was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that I was suffering from a severe psychotic break following a failed romance which never happened. It claimed I had become obsessed with my younger sister, that I was financially abusive to my elderly parents, and that I had fabricated the police report as an act of hysterical revenge. It warned the company that I was a liability and a danger to myself and others. "They called HR," Sterling said, his voice low. "Your mother, she was distinct. She told my head of people that you have a history of pathological lying and that you are currently off your medication." I placed the paper back on the desk. I looked Sterling in the eye. "Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, "do you recall our conversation 3 weeks ago, the day after I discovered the fraud?" Sterling nodded slowly. "I do. I informed you then that I had become the victim of significant identity theft involving immediate family members," I reminded him. "I informed you that I had retained counsel and filed criminal charges. I warned you that there might be retaliation because the perpetrators are desperate. This is that retaliation." Sterling studied me. He looked for the crack in the armor, the sign of the unstable woman my father had painted. He saw only the director of strategy who had saved the company $2 million in the last quarter. "Your mother sounded convincing," Sterling admitted. "To an outsider. She sounds like a heartbroken parent trying to save her child. But I am not an outsider. I know you, Gwendolyn. You are the most rational person in this building." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Security, this is Sterling. Please update the front desk protocol. Robert and Linda Fairhaven are persona non grata. If they step onto the premises, do not engage. Call the police immediately for trespassing." He released the button and looked back at me. "I am sorry you are going through this. The company stands behind you. But Gwendolyn, end this. Don't let them drag this out." "I intend to," I said. I left his office with my job secure. But my heart was cold. They had tried to take my livelihood. They knew that my career was the one thing I had built entirely on my own, the one place where I was not just Tiffany's sister, and they had tried to burn it down just to create a smokescreen for their crime. 2 days later, the war moved to the courtroom. It was a preliminary hearing to determine the admissibility of evidence. The courtroom was sterile and smelled of floor wax. Tiffany sat at the defense table next to Leonard Smalls. She was wearing a modest gray cardigan and flat shoes, a costume clearly chosen by her lawyer to make her look like a librarian rather than an influencer. She did not look at me. My parents sat in the gallery directly behind her. When I entered with Harrison, my mother let out a loud, theatrical sob. My father put his arm around her, glaring at me with a hatred so pure it felt like physical heat. Leonard Smalls stood up. He did not have the grace of Harrison. He moved with the jerky energy of a used car salesman trying to close a deal before the engine fell out. "Your Honor," Smalls boomed, addressing Judge Vance, "the defense moves to dismiss all charges. This entire case is a misunderstanding, a tragic family dispute that has been blown out of proportion by a vindictive sister. This is a fraud case." "Counselor," Judge Vance said, peering over her spectacles, "the evidence suggests a substantial sum of money was misappropriated." "Not misappropriated. Your Honor, gifted." Harrison stiffened beside me. "Objection," he said calmly. "There is no record of a gift." "Ah, but there is." Smalls reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sheet of paper sealed in a plastic evidence bag. He held it up like a trophy. "We have here a letter, a handwritten letter from the accuser, Gwendolyn Fairhaven, to her sister. It was found by my client's parents in the back of a drawer just yesterday." He walked the letter to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Harrison and I were given a copy. I looked at the document. It was written on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was a terrifyingly accurate mimicry of my own, the loops of the Y, the sharp crossing of the T. My mother had always forged my excuse notes for school when I was sick. She had perfected my script decades ago. The letter was dated January 15th. "Dearest Tiff, I know things have been tough. I want you to have the money from the home equity line. Consider it an early wedding gift for whenever you find the right guy. You are the star of the family, and I just want to help you shine. Use the accounts as you see fit. I will handle the payments. Love, Gwen. I felt a wave of nausea. The text was so cloying, so unlike anything I would ever write. Star of the family. It was my mother's voice coming through the pen. And early wedding gift. Tiffany was not even dating anyone. It was a clumsy, desperate lie. "This is a forgery," I whispered to Harrison. "I know," Harrison said. He was not looking at the handwriting. He was looking at the paper itself. He pulled a small jeweler's loupe from his pocket and leaned over the photocopy. Then he looked at the original in the judge's hand. "Your Honor," Smalls continued, preening, "as you can see, Ms. Fairhaven authorized the use of these funds. She is now suffering from buyer's remorse and is using the court system to punish her sister. We ask for immediate dismissal." Judge Vance looked at the letter, then at me. "Ms. Fairhaven, is this your writing?" "It is not, Your Honor," I said clearly. "She is lying," my father shouted from the gallery. "I saw her write it. She wrote it at the kitchen table." "Order." Judge Vance slammed her gavel. "One more outburst from the gallery and you will be removed." Harrison stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked like a surgeon about to perform an amputation. "Your Honor," Harrison said, his voice smooth and deadly. "May I approach the bench to examine the original document?" "You may." Harrison walked up, took the letter, and held it up to the courtroom lights. He turned it over. He angled it. "Mr. Smalls," Harrison said, turning to the defense table, "you stated this letter was written on January 15th of this year. That is the date on the page." Smalls sneered. "Unless you are suggesting my client can time travel." "No," Harrison said. "But I am suggesting that her accomplices are not very observant." Harrison turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to direct the court's attention to the watermark on this paper. This is a standard sheet from a Meade 5-star notebook. Since 2020, this manufacturer has encoded a production batch date into the watermark to track quality control. It is very faint, but it is there." The room went silent. Tiffany stopped chewing her lip. Smalls stopped smiling. Harrison read from the paper. "The code here is 03-24. That stands for March 2024. He let that sink in. "This letter is dated January 15th, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. "Yet it is written on paper that was not manufactured until 2 months later. Unless Ms. Fairhaven wrote this letter on paper that did not yet exist, this document is a fabrication created after the fact, likely within the last 48 hours. Harrison dropped the letter onto the defense table. It landed with a soft slap that sounded like a gunshot. "This is not just a lie, Your Honor," Harrison said. "This is tampering with evidence. This is perjury, and since Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven just claimed they saw her write it, they have now implicated themselves in a conspiracy to defraud this court." I looked at my parents. My mother's face had gone the color of old ash. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My father looked as if he had been struck by a physical blow. He slumped in the bench, his arrogance evaporating instantly. They had thought they were smarter than the system. They thought a piece of paper and a sob story would defeat forensic science. They were used to manipulating emotions, not facts. Tiffany looked at her lawyer. "You said this would work," she hissed, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Shut up," Smalls whispered back, sweating profusely. Judge Vance was no longer looking at the evidence over her glasses. She had taken them off. Her expression was one of cold, controlled fury. "Mr. Smalls," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I am revoking the possibility of any plea deal involving probation. The court takes a very dim view of fabricated evidence, and I am forwarding this transcript and the physical evidence to the district attorney's office to consider additional charges against your client and her parents for obstruction of justice." "But, Your Honor," Smalls began. "Sit down," she barked. She turned her gaze to Tiffany. Young lady, you are digging a hole so deep you may never see daylight again. If I see one more piece of fake evidence, I will revoke your bail and remand you to custody until trial. Do you understand? Yes, Tiffany squeaked. The hearing ended. As the bailiff called, "All rise," I gathered my things. I walked past the defense table. Tiffany refused to look at me. She was trembling. I walked past the gallery. My parents were still sitting there, frozen. As I passed the aisle, my father looked up. His eyes were no longer filled with anger. They were filled with terror. He knew. He finally knew that he could not bully his way out of this. But then, the terror shifted. It hardened. He looked at me, and I saw the calculation. He was not sorry he had done it. He was sorry he had been caught, and he blamed me for the catching. You are destroying us, he whispered as I passed. Are you happy now? You are sending your mother to prison? I stopped. I turned to face him. The courtroom was emptying, but the air between us was thick with 30 years of unspoken resentment. I am not sending her to prison, Dad, I said. She bought her own ticket when she forged that letter. I am just the one checking the boarding pass. I walked out of the courtroom. Harrison was waiting for me in the hallway. That was dramatic, he said. It was necessary, I replied. You know what this means, Gwendolyn, Harrison asked, as we walked toward the elevators. They are desperate. The letter was a Hail Mary. They have nothing left. No defense, no alibi, no money. They are cornered animals. I know, I said, and that makes them dangerous. I thought about the hate in my father's eyes. They would not stop. They could not stop. To stop would be to admit that they had sacrificed their eldest daughter for a lie. They would burn everything to the ground before they admitted they were wrong. But they forgot one thing. I was a logistician. I knew how to manage a fire. You don't fight it with emotion. You starve it of oxygen. And I had just cut off their air supply. The courtroom in the King County Courthouse was a cavern of polished mahogany and fluorescent light. A space designed to intimidate the guilty and humble the innocent. I sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecutor's table. In a criminal trial, the victim is merely a witness for the state, a piece of evidence with a pulse. I was not the plaintiff here, the state of Washington was, but as I stared at the back of my sister's head, I knew that this was, and always had been, a war between two versions of reality. The air in the room was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, monotonous drone. It smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. I sat with my hands clasped in my lap, my knuckles white, my posture rigid. I had been instructed by the assistant district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Vance, no relation to the judge, to remain stoic. Do not react, she had told me. No matter what they say, do not roll your eyes, do not scoff, and do not cry if you get emotional. They win. They want to paint you as unstable. Be the ice queen. So I became ice. Tiffany sat at the defense table. The transformation was calculated and startling. The girl who had live-streamed her arrest in a $600 jumpsuit was gone. In her place sat a fragile, trembling creature wearing a high-collared blouse from Target and a pair of oversized glasses that she did not need. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She looked like a frightened librarian. She looked like a child who had lost her way. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, designed to elicit sympathy from the 12 jurors sitting in the box to my left, behind her. In the first row of the public gallery sat my parents. They did not look at Tiffany. They looked at me. Their gazes were heavy, physical things, laden with a hatred so pure it felt like radiant heat against the back of my neck. They were not there to support a defendant. They were there to destroy a traitor. The trial had been going on for 3 hours. The prosecution had laid out the facts, the bank records, the IP addresses, the surveillance footage of the woman in the wig. It was dry, clinical, and damning. But criminal cases are not just about facts. They are about stories. And Leonard Smalls, Tiffany's lawyer, was about to tell a fairy tale. "The defense calls Linda Fairhaven to the stand," Smalls announced. My mother stood up. She walked to the witness box with a slow, heavy gait. Clutching a handkerchief, she was sworn in. When asked to state her name, her voice wavered, a perfect tremble of maternal anguish. "Linda Fairhaven," she whispered. Smalls approached the stand, his manner gentle, almost reverent. "Mrs. Fairhaven, you are the mother of both the defendant, Tiffany, and the complaining witness, Gwendolyn. Is that correct?" "Yes," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "I love them both dearly. It breaks my heart to be here." "I can imagine," Smalls said soothingly. "Now, Mrs. Fairhaven, let us talk about the financial dynamics in your family. The prosecution claims that Tiffany stole this money. Is that how you see it?" My mother took a deep breath. She looked directly at the jury, her eyes wide and wet. "No, absolutely not. In our house, we have always been communal. We are a team. Gwendolyn has been very successful, and we are so proud of her. But she has always said, since the day she got her first paycheck, 'Mom, Dad, my success is your success. What is mine is yours.'" I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. I had never said that. I had said, "I will help with the grocery bill," or "I will cover the heating repair." I had never declared my bank account open season for looting. "So," Smalls continued, "was there an understanding regarding this specific line of credit?" "Yes." My mother lied. The word hung in the air, smooth and toxic. Tiffany was struggling. She was trying so hard to get her business off the ground. "We sat down at dinner one night, Gwen, Tiffany, Bob, and I." Gwen said, "I have this equity in my name, but I'm not using it, Tiffany. You use it to get started. Just pay me back when you make it big." It was a verbal agreement, a sisterly promise. The jury shifted in their seats. I saw a middle-aged woman in the back row nod slightly. It was working. My mother was painting a picture of a generous agreement gone wrong. A civil contract dispute masquerading as a felony. "If Gwen agreed to it," Smalls asked, pivoting to face me, "why are we here? Why did she go to the police?" My mother looked at me then. Her expression shifted from sadness to a pitying disappointment. "It was the birthday party," she said softly. "The birthday party," Smalls repeated, acting surprised. "Yes, last month, Tiffany threw a party for her business partners. It was small, just industry people. She forgot to invite Gwendolyn. It was an honest mistake, but Gwen has always been sensitive. She has always been jealous of Tiffany's popularity. When she saw the photos online, she snapped. She called us screaming. She said, 'If I am not good enough for her party, she is not good enough for my money.' She went to the police the next day out of spite. This isn't about fraud. Sir, this is about a hurt feeling." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw the jurors exchange glances. Suddenly, the stack of bank statements didn't look like evidence of a crime. It looked like the scorecard of a petty sibling rivalry. My mother had reduced a $185,000 theft to a tantrum over a slice of cake. I dug my fingernails into my palms until the skin broke. The betrayal was absolute. She was under oath. She had placed her hand on a Bible and sworn to tell the truth. And then she had looked 12 strangers in the eye and assassinated my character to save the daughter she actually loved. "Thank you, Mrs. Fairhaven," Smalls said. "No further questions." The prosecutor, Mr. Thorne, stood up for cross-examination. He was a tall man with a sharp, angular face. He tried to dismantle her story, asking for dates, for times, for proof of this dinner conversation. But my mother was slippery. "I don't recall the exact date," she would say. "We have so many family dinners. It was casual. We didn't think we needed a contract between sisters." Her vagueness was her shield. You cannot disprove a memory that never happened. Next, the defense called my father. Robert Fairhaven walked to the stand with his chest puffed out. He did not look like a grieving father. He looked like a man inconvenienced by the stupidity of others. He sat down, adjusted his tie, and glared at the prosecutor before Smalls even began. "Mr. Fairhaven," Smalls said, "do you agree with your wife's testimony?" "100%, my father boomed. His voice filled the room, authoritative and deep. "I raised my girls to share. I taught them that family comes first. Always. Did you facilitate the transfer of the passport and documents to Tiffany?" Smalls asked. This was the dangerous question, the one that touched on his own criminal liability. "I did," my father said. Unrepentant. "Gwendolyn was busy. She's always working. She works 80 hours a week. She doesn't have time for paperwork. She told me, 'Dad, just handle it for Tiff. Get the documents from the safe.' So I did. I was helping my daughter execute her wishes." "So you believed you had permission?" "I did not believe it," my father scoffed. "I knew it. Gwendolyn makes nearly $300,000 a year. This debt is nothing to her. It is pocket change. Why would she care? She is only doing this now to punish us. She is vindictive. She has always been cold. She thinks her money makes her better than us." He pointed a finger at me from the witness stand. "She is sitting there right now, watching her sister suffer, and she is enjoying it. That is the kind of person she is. She is willing to send her own flesh and blood to prison just to prove a point." I felt the eyes of the courtroom turn to me. They were judging my suit, my posture, my dry eyes. My father had successfully weaponized my success. He made my hard work look like greed, and my pursuit of justice look like sadism. "Mr. Fairhaven," Smalls said, "did Gwendolyn ever ask for the money back before going to the police?" "No," my father lied. "She never said a word. She just blindsided us with the cops. It was an ambush." Smalls sat down, looking satisfied. The narrative was set. I was the rich, heartless sister who had entrapped my naive, entrepreneurial sibling because I was not invited to a party. Mr. Thorne stood up. He walked to the center of the room. He did not look at his notes. He looked directly at my father. "Mr. Fairhaven," Thorne began, his voice cool and level. "You claim that Gwendolyn gave you verbal permission to access her safe and remove her passport. Is that correct?" "Yes," my father said. "And you claim she gave verbal permission for Tiffany to sign her name on a loan application for $150,000. "Yes. And verbal permission for 3 credit cards." "Yes. It was a blanket permission. Help your sister." Thorne walked closer to the witness stand. "Mr. Fairhaven, you are a retired insurance adjuster. Are you not?" My father blinked. "I am. In your 30 years as an insurance adjuster, did you ever accept a verbal claim for $150,000 without a signature, a recording, or a written statement?" My father stiffened. "That is different. That is business. This is family." "Ah," Thorne said. "So the laws of fraud do not apply to your family." "I didn't say that," my father snapped. "I said we trusted each other." "You trusted Gwendolyn's money," Thorne corrected. "But let us look at the timeline. You say Gwendolyn gave this permission because she makes, in your words, pocket change of $300,000 a year. Are you aware that because of this pocket change debt, Gwendolyn was denied a mortgage for her primary residence, that she lost her home? She can buy another house," my father dismissed. "She has plenty of money. That is not the question." "Mr. Fairhaven," Thorne said, his voice sharpening. "The question is about consent. You claim she consented, yet, when she discovered the debt, she immediately filed a police report. Does that sound like the action of someone who consented?" "She changed her mind," my father insisted. "She is an Indian giver." A gasp went through the room at the slur. Thorne paused, letting the ugliness of the comment hang in the air. "Mr. Fairhaven," Thorne said slowly, "I want to be very clear. You entered your daughter's home while she was away. You opened a locked safe. You removed a federal identification document. You gave it to another person to use for a loan. Do you have a single text message, a single email, a single voicemail, or a scrap of paper from Gwendolyn Fairhaven authorizing this?" My father's face turned red. "I told you, it was a conversation at dinner. So your evidence is your word. My word is bond," my father shouted, slamming his hand on the railing. "I am her father. I do not need a permission slip to help my children. I made her. I put a roof over her head for 18 years. She owes me. Her money is my money. If I say it is—" The courtroom went dead silent. My father froze. He realized, a second too late, what he had just admitted. He had dropped the mask of the benevolent patriarch and revealed the tyrant beneath. He had just stated, on the record, that he believed he had an inherent right to my property simply because he was my father. Thorne smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile. "So," Thorne said softly, "it is not that she gave permission, it is that you believe you did not need it. You believe her assets belong to you." "I didn't say that," my father stammered, trying to backtrack. "I said we are a family." "No further questions," Thorne said, turning his back on him. My father sat there, breathing heavily. He looked at the jury. They were not nodding anymore. They were looking at him with a mixture of horror and distaste. He had shown them the monster. He had shown them that this was not about sharing. It was about ownership. I looked at him, and for the first time in the trial, our eyes met. He looked furious, humiliated, and small. He had tried to frame me as the villain, but in his arrogance, he had confessed his own motive. He didn't steal the money because he thought I would say yes. He stole it because he didn't care if I said no. As he stepped down from the witness stand, walking past me, the air felt lighter. The lie had been punctured, but the trial was not over. The judge still had a question to ask, and that question was waiting in the wings, ready to deliver the final blow to 30 years of gaslighting. The transition from the defense table to the witness stand felt like crossing a physical chasm. As I walked past the jury box, I could feel the weight of the narrative my parents had spun. To the jurors, I was currently a wealthy, cold-hearted spinster who had weaponized a misunderstanding to punish a younger, prettier sister. My father's testimony, though damaging to his own character at the end, had still planted the seed of doubt. Was there a verbal agreement? Was this just a messy family squabble? I sat in the chair. The wood was hard. I smoothed my skirt, placed my hands on my lap, and looked directly at Mr. Thorne. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Tiffany. I was done engaging with the emotional fiction they lived in. I was about to introduce them to the cold, binary world of digital forensics. "Ms. Fairhaven," Thorne began, his voice calm and steadying. "You have heard the testimony of your parents. They claim you gave verbal permission for these loans. Did you—" "No," I said. My voice did not waver. "I did not." "They claim you are jealous of your sister's social media success. Are you—" "I am the director of strategy for a logistics firm," I replied. "My metric for success is efficiency and profit margins, not likes on an app. I have no interest in my sister's online persona." "Let us look at the timeline," Thorne said. He walked to the projector screen set up for the jury. "The defense claims this was a gift, a consensual sharing of resources. If that were true, one would expect transparency. Ms. Fairhaven, can you tell the jury what you found on your personal laptop 3 days after the first withdrawal from the home equity line?" I turned to the jury. I needed them to understand this. "I have a personal laptop that I leave at my parents' house for when I visit on weekends. It is password protected. On November 12th, I logged in and checked my trash folder in my email client. I found 7 emails from the bank. They were security alerts notifying me of a new device login and large wire transfer initiated." "Why were they in the trash?" Thorne asked. "Because someone had accessed my email, marked them as read, and then deleted them," I explained. "But they made a mistake. They didn't empty the trash folder. I recovered the metadata." Thorne clicked a remote. A blown-up image of the email log appeared on the screen. "This is the access log," I pointed out. The emails were accessed and deleted at 2:45 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was at my office in downtown Seattle at that time. My keycard swipe logs prove I was in a meeting. However, the IP address that accessed my email, the series of numbers you see highlighted in yellow, originates from a device named Tiffany's iPhone 14 Pro. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the defense table. Leonard Smalls was scribbling furiously. "So," Thorne summarized, "at the exact moment you were allegedly gifting this money, your sister was hacking into your email to delete the bank's warning notifications." "Yes," I said. "If I had given permission, there would be no need to hide the alerts." "Let us go deeper," Thorne said. "Your father claimed that you gave him permission to open your safe and retrieve your physical security token, the small device that generates the 6-digit code for wire transfers. He said he did this at your request." "He lied," I said simply. "And how can you prove that—" I took a breath. This was it. This was the moment I had been saving. My parents thought they knew everything about me. They knew I was organized. They knew I was private, but they did not know that 3 years ago. After a series of package thefts in my neighborhood, I had installed a high-definition motion-activated camera system inside my home. One of those cameras was concealed on a bookshelf in the living room, directly facing the wall safe. "I have video and audio evidence from inside my home on the day the token was taken," I said. Smalls jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. We have not seen this footage, and under Washington law, recording a private conversation without consent is inadmissible." "Mr. Smalls," Judge Vance said, her voice icy, "this is a recording made within the witness's own home. The defendant was there without the homeowner present. There is no expectation of privacy when you have entered someone's home to remove items from a locked safe." "Overruled." Thorne nodded to the bailiff. "Play Exhibit G." The courtroom lights were dimmed. The large monitor flickered to life. The timestamp read August 14th. The time was 3:15 in the afternoon. The angle showed my living room. It was quiet for a moment. And then the front door opened. My father walked in. He looked nervous. He was checking the windows. Behind him, Tiffany walked in. She was not wearing the librarian outfit she had on today. She was wearing a crop top and sunglasses. Holding her phone to her ear, the audio was crystal clear. Father's voice. "Hurry up. Tiff, I don't like this. If she comes home early." Tiffany's voice. "Relax, Dad. She is in a board meeting. I checked her calendar. She is locked in until 5. The jury watched as my father walked to the painting that hid the wall safe. He moved it. He dialed in a combination I realized he must have memorized from watching me years ago. The safe beeped open. My father reached in and grabbed my passport and the small black security token. He handed them to Tiffany, and then Tiffany laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. She held the token up to the light, inspecting it. Then she spoke into her phone. She wasn't talking to me. She was on a call. Tiffany's voice on the recording. "Mom, yeah, we got it. We are in. Daddy got the token. I am going to the bank now to set up the transfer." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end, my mother. Tiffany's voice. I know. Don't worry. Gwen is so stupid. She never checks this stuff. She thinks she is so smart with her spreadsheets. But she is oblivious. Just make sure you keep her at dinner on Sunday. Okay, distract her. If she asks about the mail, tell her the postman has been skipping the block. I need 3 days for the funds to clear before she notices anything. The recording ended. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. That silence was broken by a sound from the gallery. It was my mother. She let out a strangled gasp, a sound like an animal caught in a trap. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous indignation a moment ago, was now the color of bleached bone. She was gripping the bench in front of her so hard that her knuckles were yellow. She had testified under oath that I had agreed to this. She had testified that it was a gift, and now the entire court had heard her daughter conspiring with her to distract me. calling me stupid, and explicitly planning the cover-up. My father sat frozen, staring at the screen where his own image had just committed a felony. He looked shrunken. The blustering patriarch who claimed ownership of my assets had vanished, replaced by a petty thief caught on tape. Thorne let the silence stretch. He was a master of timing. He waited until the jury had fully processed the cruelty of the words. "She is so stupid." "Premeditation," Thorne said, turning to the jury. "Conspiracy, deception. You just heard the defendant and her parents planning the theft. You heard them planning the distraction. You heard them mocking the victim." He turned to the defense table. "That does not sound like a gift, does it, Mr. Smalls?" Smalls had his head in his hands. He knew it was over. There is no legal maneuvering that can save a client from their own voice mocking the victim while holding the stolen goods. I, Smalls stammered. "The defense objects to the context." "The context is clear," Judge Vance snapped. She looked furious. "Sit down. Counselor." The attention of the room shifted to Tiffany. The fragile librarian act had shattered. She was staring at the monitor, her mouth open. She looked at the jury and saw 12 pairs of eyes looking back at her with unmasked disgust. They didn't see a poor, pressured influencer anymore. They saw a predator. And then Tiffany broke. It wasn't a graceful breakdown. It was ugly. "It's not fair," she screamed, jumping up from her chair. The sudden movement made the bailiff reach for his taser. "Sit down, Ms. Fairhaven," the judge ordered. "No," Tiffany yelled, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of self-pity. "You don't understand. I had to do it. I had to. The algorithm was suppressing my content. I needed the Porsche for the engagement metrics if I didn't post lifestyle content. I was losing followers. I was losing everything." She turned to me, her face twisted and red. "You have so much money, Gwen. You just sit on it. You are boring. You don't do anything with it. I was building a brand. I was going to be famous. You ruined it. You are selfish. You ruined my life because you are jealous that people like me more than you." "Ms. Fairhaven, silence." Judge Vance banged the gavel so hard, I thought the handle would snap. "It is society's fault," Tiffany shrieked, flailing her arms as Smalls tried to pull her down. "The pressure. You don't know the pressure to be perfect. I did what I had to do to survive. It is not a crime to want to be successful." "Bailiff, restrain the defendant," Vance commanded. 2 officers moved in, grabbing Tiffany by the arms and forcing her back into her chair. She was sobbing now, a loud, heaving wail that sounded like a toddler who had been denied a toy. Mom, help me. Tell them we needed the money." But my mother did not answer. Linda Fairhaven was staring at the floor, unable to lift her head. She knew. She knew that the recording had not only convicted her daughter, but had likely indicted her as well. The distraction she had provided at dinner was now a criminal act of aiding and abetting. I sat on the witness stand, watching the chaos. I felt a strange sense of detachment. Tiffany's outburst confirmed everything I had suspected, but feared to articulate. She didn't steal because she was in trouble. She didn't steal to pay for food or rent. She stole because she felt entitled to my life. She stole because she believed that her desire for internet fame was more important than my reality. And my parents had enabled it. They had bought into the delusion that Tiffany was special, that rules didn't apply to her, and that I was merely the fuel to be burned in her engine. Thorne looked at me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The prosecution rests," he said quietly. I stepped down from the witness stand. My legs felt light. I walked back to my seat in the gallery, but I didn't sit behind the prosecutor this time. I walked to the back row, near the door. I wanted to be ready to leave. I wanted to be as far away from the toxic blast radius of the Fairhaven family as possible. The defense tried to rally. Smalls mumbled something about a closing statement, about mitigating circumstances, about the mental toll of social media, but nobody was listening. The jury was still hearing the echo of Tiffany's laugh on the tape. They were still hearing my father say, "Hurry up, The evidence was not just steel. It was titanium. It was unbreakable. The lie of the happy family had been dissected, autopsied, and displayed for the world to see, and all that was left was the rot. As the judge called for a recess before closing arguments, I saw my father turn around. He looked for me. When he saw me standing by the exit, he didn't glare. He didn't shout. He looked old. He looked like a man who had bet his entire life on a horse that had just broken its leg. And he realized he had sold the farm to place the bet. He mouthed one word to me, please. It was a plea for mercy, a plea to drop the charges, to stop the bleeding, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. I looked at him. I thought about the 300 months of payments they had offered me. I thought about the vindictive email sent to my boss. I thought about the wig. I didn't mouth anything back. I simply turned my head and looked out the window at the rain. The time for pleas was 6 months and $185,000 ago. Now, it was time for the verdict. The jury did not need days to deliberate. They did not even need an afternoon. They returned within 3 hours, their faces grim and set like stone. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Guilty of identity theft in the first degree, guilty of bank fraud, guilty of forgery, guilty of theft of property exceeding $5,000. But the drama was not over in the state of Washington. After a verdict is rendered, there is a sentencing phase, and before the judge passes sentence, there is an opportunity for statements. Usually, this is where the defendant apologizes. Usually, this is where the family asks for mercy based on the good character of the accused. My family, however, decided to use this final platform not to beg for forgiveness, but to put me on trial one last time. Leonard Smalls, looking defeated and sweating through his cheap suit, stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice lacking its earlier bluster, "before you pass sentence, the defense asks that the parents of the defendant be allowed to speak. They wish to provide context on Tiffany's character and the unique family dynamics that led to this unfortunate situation." Judge Vance sat high on her bench. She was a woman of perhaps 60 years, with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that had seen every variation of human deception. She looked at Smalls, then at Tiffany, who was now slumped in her chair, weeping silently, and finally at my parents. "Very well," Judge Vance said. "But I will warn you. Mr. Smalls, the jury has spoken. We are past the point of debating facts. This is for mitigation only." My mother, Linda, rose first. She walked to the podium that had been set up in the center of the room. She looked smaller than she had a few days ago. The exposure of her conspiratorial phone call had drained the self-righteous color from her cheeks. Yet her delusion remained firmly intact. She gripped the sides of the podium, her knuckles white. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling, "I stand here as a mother who loves both her children equally. You have to understand, Tiffany is not a criminal. She is a bright, sparkling girl who just got lost. She got confused by the pressure of the world." She turned slightly to look at me. I sat in the gallery, unmoving. "We only wanted peace," my mother continued, tears spilling onto her blouse. "That is all Bob and I have ever wanted, a happy family. But Gwendolyn has always been so difficult, so rigid, even as a child. She was obsessed with rules. She never understood that sometimes. Love means bending the rules." I felt the breath catch in my throat. Bending the rules. That was what she called felony fraud. "Tiffany is young," my mother pleaded, looking back at the judge. "She is 28, but she is young for her age. She is a dreamer. She borrowed that money because she wanted to make us proud. She wanted to be a success like her sister. She did not do it out of malice. There is not a malicious bone in her body. She just assumed Gwendolyn would understand. Because that is what sisters do. They help each other." My mother's voice rose, becoming shrill. "But Gwendolyn refused to help. She has always been cold. She hoards her success. If she had just been a little more generous, a little more forgiving, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't be in this courtroom. We would be at home, having dinner. Please, Your Honor, do not send my baby to prison because her sister is too stubborn to forgive a mistake. It is Gwendolyn's hardness that is the tragedy here, not Tiffany's actions. She stepped down, sobbing into her hands. The room was silent, but it was an uncomfortable silence. Even the bailiff looked away, embarrassed by the sheer lack of accountability. Then, my father stood up. Robert Fairhaven did not cry. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the podium with the heavy, stomping gait of a man who still believed he was the patriarch in charge, despite the fact that his authority had been stripped away by a security camera recording. He did not look at the judge. He looked directly at me. "I want to talk about justice," he announced, his voice booming. "Because this is not justice. This is revenge." He pointed a thick finger at me. "Look at her. She is sitting there in a $2,000 suit. She drives a reliable car. She has a retirement fund. She makes more money in a month than most people make in a year. $185,000 to her. That is numbers on a screen. It does not affect her ability to eat. It does not affect her ability to live." He turned to Judge Vance, his face reddening. "Your Honor, why are we destroying a young woman's life over money that the victim does not even need? Gwendolyn could have absorbed this loss. She could have written it off, but she chose to call the police. She chose to drag her family through the mud. Why? Because she is vindictive." There it was, the word, vindictive. "She is doing this to punish us," my father continued, gaining momentum. "She is jealous that we give Tiffany attention, so she decided to take Tiffany away from us. It is a sick, twisted power play. We are fair parents. We have always treated them fairly. We gave Gwendolyn structure because she needed structure. We gave Tiffany support because she needed support. That is equity. But Gwendolyn wants to keep score. She wants to see her sister in handcuffs, just to prove she is the powerful one." He gripped the podium, leaning forward aggressively. "If you send Tiffany to prison, you are not serving justice. You are serving Gwendolyn's ego. You are letting a bitter, wealthy woman bully her younger sister. This debt is a civil matter. It should have been handled at the kitchen table, not in a cage. This prosecution is a waste of taxpayer money and a disgrace to the institution of family." He spat the final word out like a curse. Family. He stepped back, breathing heavily, looking around the room as if expecting applause for his brave truth-telling. Instead, he found only the stony faces of the jurors and the terrified expression of his younger daughter, who perhaps realized that her father's aggression was doing her no favors. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly that my fingernails were cutting crescents into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and list every birthday they had missed, every achievement they had ignored, every time I had bailed them out of smaller jams before this one. I wanted to scream that I didn't absorb the loss. I lost my home. I lost the one thing I had built for myself, but I remained silent. I remembered the prosecutor's advice: be the ice queen. If I screamed, I proved them right. If I cried, I was hysterical. If I argued, I was defensive. My silence was the only weapon I had left. It was a mirror, reflecting their ugliness back at them without distortion. They had called me vindictive. They had called me rigid. They had stood before a court of law and argued that because I was successful, I deserved to be robbed. They had argued that my boundaries were a form of violence against their incompetence. It was the ultimate gaslight. They had taken the reality of the situation that they had stolen my identity and my future and inverted it so completely that in their minds, I was the predator and the thief was the prey. Judge Vance had been watching them. Throughout their speeches, she had not moved. She had sat with her chin resting on her hand, her eyes narrow and unreadable. But as my father sat down, looking smug, the judge shifted. She reached for a thick file on her desk. It was not the case file for the trial. It was a different folder, bound in red. I recognized it. It was the financial disclosure dossier that the court had ordered my parents to produce earlier in the week to determine if they had the assets to pay restitution since Tiffany was indigent. Judge Vance opened the file. The sound of the paper turning was loud in the quiet room. She adjusted her glasses. She read a page, then turned another. She spent a long 2 minutes reading in silence, letting the tension in the room build until it was nearly unbearable. Then, she looked up. She did not look at Tiffany. She looked directly at Robert and Linda Fairhaven. "Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven," Judge Vance said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that silenced the shuffling in the gallery. "You have used the word vindictive 5 times in the last 10 minutes. You have described your daughter Gwendolyn as rigid and unforgiving. You have stated, on the record, that you are fair parents who treat your children equally and that you only protect the one who needs help." "We do, Your Honor," my father interrupted, nodding vigorously. "We are good parents." "Silence," Vance said. It was not a shout, but a command that snapped like a whip. "You claim," the judge continued, her eyes drilling into them, "that Gwendolyn is pursuing this case out of spite. You claim that a debt of $185,000 is nothing to her, and therefore should be forgiven in the name of family unity." "Exactly," my mother sobbed softly. "It is just money." Judge Vance picked up a single sheet of paper from the red file. She held it up. "I have here the financial history report you submitted to the court's probation department," Vance said. "It details your assets, your liabilities, and your legal history. It is a standard background check for restitution purposes." My father frowned. He looked confused. He clearly did not remember what was in the deep history of those files. "You say you are fair," Vance repeated. "You say Gwendolyn is the one who holds grudges. You say she is the one who goes to the police over family matters." Vance lowered the paper and leaned forward. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven, if Gwendolyn is the vindictive one for reporting a theft of nearly $200,000, then I have a question for you." She paused. She looked from my father to my mother, pinning them to their seats with her gaze. "Why?" Judge Vance asked, her voice ringing like a bell. "Does this court record show that 10 years ago, you, Robert and Linda Fairhaven, called the police and filed charges against your daughter Gwendolyn?" The room stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had forgotten. In the chaos of the last decade, I had buried that memory so deep I thought it had rotted away. But the system never forgets. "She was 22 years old," Vance continued, reading from the document. "She had just graduated college, and according to this police report from 2014, you had her arrested. You pressed charges for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle and theft of property." My parents' faces went from smug to ashen in the span of a heartbeat. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "And what was the theft?" Vance asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I am looking at the details here. It says Gwendolyn sold a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, a car she drove exclusively, but was technically titled in your name for $2,000. Vance took off her glasses. She looked at them with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "She sold that car to pay for her final semester of university tuition because you had refused to co-sign her student loan. She used the money to finish her education, and for that, for $2,000 used to pay a university, you had your daughter handcuffed. You forced her to spend a night in jail until the district attorney dismissed it as a civil matter." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. "You called the police on Gwendolyn for $2,000, Vance said, emphasizing every syllable. "You called that theft. You called that a crime. But today, when your favorite daughter steals $185,000 to buy a Porsche and travel to Cabo, you call it a mistake. You call the victim vindictive." My mother shrank into her seat, pulling her cardigan tight around her as if to shield herself from the truth. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. The hypocrisy, which had been their armor for so long, had just been stripped away. They stood naked in their bias. "That was different," my father croaked, his voice barely audible. "She disobeyed us. It was about respect." "No, Mr. Fairhaven," Judge Vance said. closing the file with a sharp snap. It was not about respect. It was about control. You punish independence, and you reward dependence. You have not been protecting Tiffany. You have been enabling a criminal while persecuting the child who actually succeeded. She looked at me then, for the first time. Her expression softened. It was a look of validation. It was a look that said, "I see you. I see the truth." Then she turned back to the defense table, her face hardening into the mask of judgment. "The court has heard enough," Vance declared. "I do not need to hear any more about family values from people who have none. Please stand for sentencing." The sound of the entire room rising to its feet was like a thunderclap. I stood up. I felt lightheaded. The secret was out. The double standard was dead. And now, the hammer was about to fall. "Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven," Judge Vance repeated, her voice cutting through the humid, stagnant air of the courtroom like a scalpel. "I want to be absolutely certain I understand your position before I pass sentence. You claim that you are parents of equity. You claim that Gwendolyn is the selfish one, the vindictive one, for refusing to forgive this debt because, in your words, family is above money." My father, Robert, nodded vigorously. He seemed to think he had found a sympathetic ear, or perhaps he was simply so deluded by his own narrative that he could not see the precipice he was standing on. "That is correct, Your Honor," he said, his chest puffing out slightly. "We believe in forgiveness. We believe that money comes and goes, but blood is forever. Gwendolyn has forgotten that. She is punishing her sister over a clerical error because she has lost sight of what matters. Family is everything." "Family is everything," Judge Vance echoed. Her tone was unreadable. She looked down at the paper in her hand, the one she had pulled from the red financial dossier. She adjusted her glasses, reading the text one more time, as if to ensure her eyes were not deceiving her. Then she looked up. "If family is everything, Mr. Fairhaven, and if forgiveness is your creed," she began, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register, "then can you explain this document to me?" She held the paper up. It was an old photocopy, grainy and faded, with the distinct, blocky font of a police report. "This is an incident report from the Seattle Police Department," Judge Vance said. "It is dated August 14th, 2014. That is almost exactly 10 years ago." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. 10 years ago, I had blocked it out. I had buried that summer under layers of work and ambition, sealing it in a mental vault I never intended to open. But the vault had just been blown wide open. "The report lists the complainant as Robert Fairhaven," the judge read, "and the suspect is listed as Gwendolyn Fairhaven, age 22. My father's face went slack. The confident smile vanished, replaced by a look of sudden, dawning horror. My mother let out a small, strangled sound and covered her mouth with her hand. "According to this sworn statement," Judge Vance continued, her eyes never leaving my parents, "you called the police to your home to have your daughter arrested for grand theft auto and theft of property. You demanded that officers place her in handcuffs. You demanded that she be booked into the county jail." The courtroom was deadly silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a split second, looking up in shock. "And what was the nature of this terrible crime?" Judge Vance asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did she steal a Porsche? Did she steal $185,000 to party in Mexico? No." She looked at the paper again, shaking her head in disbelief. "She sold a 2004 Toyota Camry, a car that was 10 years old at the time, a car that she drove exclusively to get to her university classes and her part-time job. But because the title was technically in your name for insurance purposes, you called it theft." "She didn't have permission," my father stammered. His voice was no longer booming. It was a thin, reedy whisper. "It was the principal." "The principal," Judge Vance snapped. She slammed the paper down on her desk. "The report states clearly that Gwendolyn told the responding officers she sold the car for $2,000. And why did she need $2,000? Mr. Fairhaven. The report says she needed it to pay for her final semester of tuition because her parents you had refused to co-sign her student loan or provide any assistance, despite having the means to do so. I closed my eyes. I could feel the handcuffs on my wrists again. I could feel the shame of the neighbors watching as the police car took me away. I remembered spending that night in a holding cell, missing my final exam review, terrified that my future was over before it began. The charges were eventually dropped because the district attorney saw it for what it was, a civil dispute, but the humiliation was permanent. You had your 22-year-old daughter thrown in a cage for $2,000 intended for her education, Judge Vance said, her voice rising, filling the room with righteous fury. You called the police on your own child for trying to pay for school. You called that justice. You called that necessary discipline. She leaned over the bench, glaring at them. But today, when your golden child steals nearly $200,000, 100 times the amount Gwendolyn took, and wastes it on vanity, on luxury, on lies, you stand here and tell me that Gwendolyn is the one who is vindictive. You tell me that family is everything. My mother was sobbing openly now, but it was not the pretty, sympathetic crying she had done earlier. It was the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who has been stripped naked in public. We were just trying to teach her a lesson, my mother wailed. Gwendolyn was always so independent. We thought she needed to learn respect. You did not teach her respect, Judge Vance corrected her coldly. You taught her that your love was conditional. You taught her that she was a commodity to be controlled, while her sister was a pet to be pampered. The judge turned to Tiffany. My sister was staring at her parents with wide, horrified eyes. She had likely never known about the arrest. She had been 18 then, probably busy with prom, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting in a cell so she could have a new dress. This court sees a lot of fraud cases, Judge Vance said, addressing the room. But rarely do I see a case where the moral rot is so clearly generational. Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven, you asked me to consider the family dynamic as a mitigating factor. I have done so, and I have found that the dynamic you created is the very cause of this crime. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. You did not protect Tiffany. You crippled her by shielding her from consequences while punishing Gwendolyn for survival. You created a narcissist who believes she is entitled to everything and responsible for nothing. Your bias is not love. It is a catalyst for criminal behavior. My father slumped into his seat. He looked small. He looked defeated. The narrative he had controlled for 30 years, the story where he was the benevolent father and I was the difficult child, had been shredded. Please stand for sentencing, Judge Vance commanded. Tiffany stood up. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to lean on the table. Leonard Small stood beside her, looking at the floor. Tiffany Fairhaven, the judge said, you have been found guilty of 4 felonies. You stole the financial identity of the one person who actually protected you. You mocked her while you robbed her. And when you were caught, you tried to destroy her reputation to save your own skin. I am sorry, Tiffany whispered. I am so sorry. I believe you are sorry that you are facing consequences, Vance said, but I do not believe you understand the gravity of what you have done. Probation is not appropriate here. You need a period of reflection that cannot be interrupted by a smartphone screen. Judge Vance picked up her gavel. I sentence you to 4 years in the Washington State Department of Corrections. You will serve a minimum of 2 years before being eligible for parole. In addition, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $185,000, plus statutory interest of 12% per annum. This debt will not be dischargeable in bankruptcy. Tiffany let out a scream. It was a short, sharp sound, like a bird flying into a window. 4 years. No. Please, I can't go to prison, Mom, Dad. And as for you, Judge Vance said, turning her gaze back to my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fairhaven. My parents stood up slowly. You are lucky that the statute of limitations has passed on the theft of the car, she said. But you are not clear of this court. You testified under oath that you witnessed Gwendolyn write a letter that forensic evidence proves was forged. That is perjury. That is a felony. I am referring the transcript of this trial to the district attorney's office with a recommendation that charges be filed against both of you for obstruction of justice and perjury." My mother collapsed back onto the bench. My father gripped the railing, his face gray. "You called your daughter vindictive," Judge Vance said, closing the file. "I call her a survivor. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Bang. The sound was final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a lifetime of manipulation. The courtroom erupted into motion. The bailiffs moved in immediately. "Hands behind your back," one of them said to Tiffany. "No," Tiffany screamed, reaching out for my mother. "Mom, do something. Don't let them take me." My mother reached out, her hand trembling, but the bailiff stepped between them. "Step back, ma'am." My father stood there, staring at nothing. He looked like a man waking up from a coma to find his house had burned down. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. I was still standing in the back row. "Gwendolyn," he mouthed. It was not a command this time. It was not an accusation. It was the name of a stranger. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called the police on me for selling a car to pay for books. I looked at the woman who had helped my sister steal my passport. I looked at the sister who had called me stupid while spending my life savings. I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. The need for their approval, which had driven me to work 80-hour weeks and buy a penthouse I didn't need just to prove I was worthy, had evaporated. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply turned my back on them. I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom. I walked down the long marble hallway, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the floor. I took the elevator down to the lobby and pushed open the doors to the outside world. Seattle was living up to its reputation. The sky was a bruised purple, and the rain was falling in sheets, washing the grime off the city streets. Usually, this weather made me feel heavy. Usually, it made me want to hide. But today, as the cold water hit my face, it felt like a baptism. It felt like the cleanest thing I had ever touched. I stood on the courthouse steps and took a deep breath. The air tasted of rain and exhaust and cedar. It tasted of freedom. I had lost the penthouse. I had lost the $185,000. I had lost the family I thought I had. But I had regained myself. I walked down the steps, opening my umbrella not to shield myself from the rain, but to shield myself from the past. I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, as I slid into the back seat. "The airport," I said. I didn't have a ticket. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in 32 years, I didn't need one. I was Gwendolyn Fairhaven. I was debt-free, guilt-free, and family-free. And as the cab pulled away, leaving the courthouse and the wreckage of my former life in the rearview mirror, I realized that the judge was right. Family is everything, and I was finally going to go find mine, the one I would build, the one I would choose, the one that would never, ever call the police on me for trying to survive. There was no forgiveness in my heart. There was only the quiet, beautiful silence of justice. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was intense, but I felt it was important to share how toxic family dynamics can hide in plain sight until it is too late. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving to work, cooking dinner, or maybe relaxing before bed? Please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life dramas about justice and resilience, please subscribe to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories. Hit that like button and give the video a hype to help us share these important stories with more people. Stay strong, and remember, your worth is not defined by how much you give to people who only know how to take.